pounds on me, so I got that fire on me. In the desert heat, I'm burning marijuana, trying to fill bags with green and blue cheese. In the city, the only thing that matters is the money, and that's the only thing I want, honey. I live the life that's crummy, so I want my gold like a day sunny. Once upon a time.
Hey, this is Bird Rabbit, and this is the MITRA Blue episode series. And for today, we are going to be doing a book read. We are going to be continuing the Buffalo Soldier book. But before we do that, I would like to give the reason why I'm reading these books, I guess. But for surely, I'm reading them for myself to learn about history, Black history, Native American history as well. But besides all that, I think it's highly important for myself in general just to know history. You know what I'm saying? My father was in the military, and his father was in the military. And before my father passed, he did join the membership of the Buffalo Soldiers in Las Vegas. So that's one of the reasons why. And besides that, even like the Native American part, you know, it's just I know it's cringe for you see on the internet, like these extremist groups, or you know what I'm saying, not extremists, but almost the point of damn near, just saying like they're true Americans, never been on a slave, they don't know what a slave boat is, all this other stuff is like that. It's good to know that like Native Americans had slaves. The Cherokee Nation had a whole ton of slaves, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's highly important, you know what I'm saying? But I can't change the world, you know what I'm saying? I can't. And but so I think that's important for myself to read, you know what I'm saying? To know information. And besides that, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's you know, it's good to know your heritage, and because I do get tired of hearing that too, you know what I'm saying? Black Americans don't know their heritage, you know what I'm saying? I've done a DNA test, you know what I'm saying, on myself. It's broken down if you believe in that stuff or not, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's good to know, especially American part, you know what I'm saying? You see all the whatever tribes, whatever region, you know what I'm saying? All that stuff was made after the, you know what I'm saying, the scramble of Africa, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just like, you know, I know my roots, you know what I'm saying? Even if you had like Native American in your blood, it'll probably be showing up as Asian, Southeast Asian, or Asian in general. It's, you know, especially if you're American, you know what I'm saying? But it'll also say if you're Native American, because my sister done a DNA test as well as my cousins. It says Native American. Me and my mother, on the other hand, all says Asian. So, you know, so we can dive into that as well. Grandmothers, you know what I'm saying, resembling, could be passed as white, all that other stuff. We can break down history or whatever. But I just think it's important to actually pick up a book, because you look at the whatever news, they say kids can't read. I don't know if teenagers can read. I don't know. But it'd be important that my kids see me, I guess, reading or trying to read. So let's continue to read this book. All right. All right. So we left off during one of the speeches that I want to say I think it was Colin Powell. I don't remember. I think it was Colin Powell, but I could be mistaken. But where we ever left off, that was the last video. So we'll continue. We're 1866, the Sergeant Major. All right. A cold November rain pelted the dining car attached to the rear of the westbound Kansas Pacific train, streaking the outside of the windows. But through the watery sheen, a young colored porter could clearly see a soldier standing near the open platform, and it was obvious he was not an ordinary colored man. Newly appointed Regimental Sergeant Major Roscoe Brassard, 10th Regiment, United States Cavalry, colored, stood at attention, clutching a leather vessel in his left hand, and in his right he held a heavy metal scabbard. Shedding a long curved 3-foot sabre, his face was smoothly shaven except for the thick mustache that flowed from beneath his broad nose to join his sideburns. Over his uniform he wore a great coat bearing the gold stripes and rockers of his rank. His highly polished cavalry boots, the tops nearly touching his knees, were sprinkled with drops of rain. The train gave a lurch, the signal that was preparing to leave. Through the frosted glass porter heard the muffled cry, "All aboard!" On the platform, Sergeant Major Brassard turned and motioned to 40 colored men he had been assigned to accompany to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the training center of 10th Regiment. Brassard's face tightened as he looked at the men, then relaxed like that of a man resigned to a distasteful task, a man who had made a decision he knew he could not back away from. Most of the men were in their 20s, a few older, and one even had gray hair. They all appeared confused, and why not? God Almighty, thought Brassard, this is not the way to treat soldiers who might die for this country. The recruits were dressed in assortment of clothing, none of which was standard U.S. military issue. They looked tired and scared to death. That was to be expected. What he didn't like was that they were also filthy and had not been properly fed. And since he had not had time to requench his rations for the men, they would not be fed until they reached Fort Leavenworth. That was when he thought of the order given to him earlier that morning, an order he found distasteful and offensive. You would draw from an armorer a pistol, carriages. Should any of the recruits attempt desertion, you are authorized to shoot and kill. Specifically, he didn't like the idea of shooting a young man for what, in circumstances, might seem a natural act. Brassard had expected to find men in some semblance of military formation with proper non-commissioned guidance. What he found was a drunken white infantry corporal standing alone on the platform. "Where are the recruits, Brassard?" he demanded. The corporal spat, then nodded over his shoulder. "They're over yonder." The corporal belched, snorted with laughter, and walked away. Brassard had only to follow the smell drifting on the cold air to locate the new recruits. They had been assembled in the area near a cattle pen. Some of the recruits had been there for days, Brassard knew, after filtering into St. Louis from all over the country, leaving the recruits to fend for themselves. The white corporals either returned to their assigned recruiting stations or decamped to one of the many saloons along the riverfront. Since colors were not permitted to wait for the train on the platform, Brassard kept the men near the cattle pen until the last moment. But now he chose to march them through the middle of the platform, past waiting passengers, one and all, to see how these men sworn to fight for their country had been treated. At the conductor's signal, Brasser led the men onto the train with relief. Since there were little feeling in his cold feet, Brasser found himself on a bench seat. He was forced to share with two other recruits. The car was designed to carry 30 passengers and now had 40. By noon, the two wood-burning stove station front and rear began warming the inside of the passenger car. And as the heat rose, mixing with the smell of unwashed bodies and clothes soiled with cattle manure, the stench became unbearable. Sergeant Major Brasser knew that if these men were to be molded into a cohesive fighting unit, they must begin embrace the maximum of the profession of arms, pride. At the moment, something inside the man broke. Years of discipline gave way to a boiling rage. Brasser stood up and looked around at the recruits. They sat staring at him, slow-eyed and dumbfounded. Like so many colored troops he had seen during the Civil War, they were malnourished, some were sick, and all sat waiting to be told what to do. Told what to do. Men without initiative, a trait that had been beaten from them over years of slavery. If they are to be men, he told himself, they must have an example. The men must learn to think for themselves if they are to survive. Men, Brasford's voice boomed through the stench of the passenger car. I want you to listen to me. I am Reginald Sergeant Major Brasford of the 10th Cavalry. You are ordered to strip off your clothes immediately. You may not get to Fort Leavenworth with full bellies, and you may be butt naked, but by God, when you do get there, you won't be smelling like a troop of dancing bears. A loud burst of laughter rose from the recruits as worn-out trousers and tattered shirts came off. Filthy drawers from those who wore them followed. The windows were lowered and loose articles of clothing began to sprinkle the landscape along 1 mile stretch of the Kansas Pacific Railroad. In the dining car, he has leaned over a passenger to serve tea. He has leaned over a passenger to serve tea. The porter saw the clothing flashing past the window. He stopped serving the tea and nervously made his way to the colored-only car. What greeted him was almost more than what he could fathom. 40 men sat naked on a hardwood benches. The windows were down and the men were shivering. But all wore smiles. Except the tall soldier with all the stripes on his immaculate uniform. The tall uniformed man thrust an angry finger at the porter. I want 40 blankets. Do you understand me, boy? The porter nodded slowly, then carefully backed out of the car. He returned minutes later with the chief conductor, who was apoplectic. What the hell are you doing? The conductor demanded. Brasford flashed a quick, menacing smile and then stepped so close to the conductor that the shorter man withdrew several steps. The important instruction in personal hygiene. These men stink. Their clothes stink. This passenger car stinks. Army regulations state that the soldiers of the United States Cavalry are not permitted to stink, except in the fields. The tall man looked around and stated a conclusion even the conductor could understand. We are not in the field. A thin dribble of tobacco juice slid from the conductor's frozen, open mouth, disappearing into his beard. You must be insane. Brasford's face hardened into a demonic mask. You may be right, but I still want 40 blankets. The conductor left, only to return again in a few minutes, accompanied by a young white officer who wore the same type of forage capped at Sergeant Major Brassford. On the camp were the cross sabres indicating cavalry. Above the sabres was the number 10, 10th Cavalry. A thin smile crept across Sergeant Major Brassford's mouth as he stood at attention. The second, Lieutenant Jonathan Bernard O'Kelly, in the company of his bride of 2 weeks, was en route to his first posting since his graduation from West Point. He had no idea that recruits he might one day lead into battle were aboard the train. What's the problem, Sergeant Major? Asked O'Kelly. He was a lean young man with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. The trace of a mustache was beginning to grow over his top lip. The Sergeant Major guessed the young man had been cultivating the blonde down the blonde. Yep. Blonde. Blonde. Yeah, I'm reading it right, if I can. Yeah. Cultivating the blown down ever since learning his posting to the cavalry. My bad. The mustache was essential to the cavalry of officer as his horse. Let me read that over. All right. What's the problem, Sergeant Major? Asked O'Kelly. He was a lean young man with blonde hair. All right. He had it right. My bad. They didn't put the E right here. Like BLOND. I'm looking for E. If I'm correct, I don't know no more. I don't know. The young man with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. The trace of a mustache was beginning to grow over his top lip. The sergeant major guessed the young man had been cultivating the blonde down ever since learning of his posting to the cavalry. The mustache was an essential to the cavalry officer as his horse. It was tradition. Another tradition was looking after your men. Excuse me. Another tradition was looking after your men. The conductor pushed through, saying, "What do you mean? What's the problem? Are you blind? There are 42 niggers in the..." Oh, I'm sorry. I emphasized that. My bad, dog. The author, sir. The author has some fun writing this. All right. What do you mean? What's the problem? Are you blind? There's 42 niggers in this passenger car, and there ain't but 2 of them got clothes on. What the fuck? There are 42 niggers in this passenger car, and there ain't but 2 of them got clothes on. I can see that, O'Kelly replied. Will the sergeant major please explain? Brassard nodded at the recruits. Sir, these men are en route to Fort Leavenworth to begin their cavalry training. Are you posted at Fort Leavenworth? Yes, sir. I'm the new regimental sergeant major. Then O'Kelly asked, "Why are these men without clothes?" Brassard explained the conditions in which he had found the recruits. They smelled, they're hungry, and, as you can see, they are without proper apparel. I've instructed them that they can go in search of food or whatever once we reach Kansas City. Laughter rolled from the hardwood benches. O'Kelly gazed at the men severely, then looked back at the conductor. O'Kelly said to the conductor, "We have a problem, sir." "You're damn right we do." O'Kelly cut off the conductor with a wave of his hand. "The problem is clearly yours. Mine." The conductor, a squat, balding man with a heavy beard, stared wide-eyed at O'Kelly. "What the hell do you mean?" "I mean, if 40 naked colored men get off the train in Kansas City in search for food or whatever, a riot could follow." The conductor nodded. "I guarantee it." My bad. "I guarantee a riot will follow. Sure as you're wearing Yankee blue, O'Kelly continued, I'm certain there will be a great many people, women included, waiting at the depot in Kansas City, not to mention those people presently aboard. The Kansas Pacific Railroad will not doubt be held responsible. Along the United States Army, the Army will survive. The Kansas Pacific Railroad will survive. I dare say Kansas City will survive. My question is, will you survive? The conductor's eyes narrowed as he tried to comprehend. Me too, my nigga. I'm trying to comprehend myself. What the fuck you talking about, dog? Oh my lord. What the fuck? The conductor's eyes narrowed as he tried to comprehend. What are you trying to say? In searching for someone to blame, your company will blame the Army. Who will blame the Sergeant Major? But from what I've observed, he seemed to have already accepted his fate. Brasser clicked his heels and snapped to attention. Yes, sir. O'Kelly nodded at Brasser and looked back at the conductor. The lead that leads you to explain to your railroad why this incident was not avoided. No doubt you'll point out that it was beyond your control. As an officer, I know that the defense is sometimes possible. However, as an officer, I also know that blame must ultimately find a place to rest. The civilian blame will quite likely rest with you, unless of course you find what the sergeant major requires to straighten out this situation. But what can I do? Moaned the conductor. O'Kelly thought for a moment. Is there a stop on the line where we can find a telegraph operator? The conductor nodded. I'll telegraph Colonel Gerson at Fort Leavenworth. Requestioning, he ordered the quartermaster to meet the train in Kansas City with trousers, boots, tunics, and greatcoats. What about when we reach Kansas City? The conductor pleaded. Brasser cleared his throat. My men will stay aboard the train until the quartermaster arrives with proper clothing. In the meantime, all they'll need is food and blankets, as though they're beginning to see some light at the end is this very dark tunnel. The conductor asked meekly, do you think your colonel will agree? O'Kelly flashed the conductor his best West Point smile. The train made an unscheduled stop at a small town where the conductor found what Sergeant Major Brasser required. The Sergeant Major signed a voucher for blankets, and he signed another voucher for the 8 smoked hams, and 2 dozen loaves of bread. Lieutenant O'Kelly wired Colonel Gerson at Fort Leavenworth and received the reply he expected. Then Brasser and the conductor brought several buckets of soapy water that the men used for blankets. Sergeant Major Brasser showed them how to make poncho by slitting a hole through the middle of the blanket through. They did not realize it. The recruits had been given their first lesson in becoming troopers of cavalry. All the recruits, including a young white officer sitting with his bride in the 4-passenger car, had learned that becoming troopers would not put them on equal footing with the white soldiers and citizenry of this hostile country. That would be more difficult campaign to wage. Let's finish this. 3 cars forward, 2nd Lieutenant Jonathan O'Kelly took a journal from his vassal and began writing his impression of the day. The writing of letters and the keeping of a journal were a professional requirement, providing a tangible reference for observation, reflection, and evaluation. The first entry was carefully thought through with O'Kelly, noting his theories on leadership of colored troops, but the day had taught him a lesson in leadership from the sergeant major that transcended race and followed the strictest teachings, and followed the strictest teachings of West Point. A good officer looked after his troops. With that, Second Lieutenant Jonathan O'Kelly began by comparing the elements that he knew were now destined to clash off the western frontier. The Red Indian of the frontier is no longer tolerable and must be wiped off the front. Let's read that over. The Red Indian of the frontier is no longer tolerable and must be wiped from the earth and subdued on reservations where he can be closely maintained and scrutinized. God damn. The use of colored troops to achieve this mission is ironic and paradoxical, for the government intends to strip one race, the Red Indians, from their human and natural rights and property by the use of force carried out by soldiers who have historically been denied human and natural rights and were considered property, and only after a great civil war were made free. Now these men are to be used tactically to deny the very same freedoms to the Red Indian. The Red Indian was in America when the first white man arrived. The colored race was brought by force to America and enslaved as a nation. We are now expecting the Red Indian to go eagerly to enslavement and are willing to use former slaves to carry out that doctrine. That is the irony and paradox for how can we as a nation say to one race that you must lose your freedom and property or die, while on the other hand we incurred such tremendous loss of life during the Civil War to remove the bonds of slavery from the slaves. Do we not have a moral obligation to both races? Or are we merely hypocrites in our policies? A policy that denies direction to the Red Indian, except internment, while at the same time uses former slaves to enforce the very type of misery they were forced to accept. The difference, as I see it, lies only in the fact that the Red Indian stands ready to fight and die for his freedom and property and has no choice, while the former slave will fight not only because he is told to do so, but also because he knows he has freedom and can now acquire property and does have a choice. The Red Indian stands to lose his culture. The colored hopes to build a culture. Who will fight the hardest? The culture that will be destroyed, or the culture that will build? The answer will only be found in the field of battle. Let's read that one over. Who will fight the hardest? The culture that will be destroyed, or the culture that will build? The answer will only be found on the field of battle. All right. So we read that chapter of, prologue of 1866, the Sergeant Major. And as it continues, it don't go on as chapters. Well, it does actually. As I'm skimming through this book, I was gonna say it goes off on timelines, but it does go off on timelines. So that was 1866 of the Buffalo Soldiers. Tension between the former slaves, Buffalo Soldiers, and the Red Indian. The Indian Wars, battle, led up to this, I guess. But that was a good story, and I hope you enjoyed. This is Bird Rabbit, and this is a Mitch Blue episode series, and you just watched the book read. And the book read of the Buffalo Soldiers. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.